et honor tibi sit, Rex Christe Redemptor.
So, now remember, it's meant ironically. It's meant ironically. It's not meant as a insult to St. Michael the Archangel. It's not meant to compare Trump to St. Michael the Archangel. It's simply a meme, let's say, to illustrate the fact that some people thinks that Trump is basically cutting off the head of Soros in what he's doing with Doge and with defunding the organization USAID and so forth. So here goes. This is from a Vigano interview with Duke in Altum from February 16th. The question, Your Excellency, the Trump administration's decision to put a stop to the immigration policies of the woke left was part of the electoral platform that brought Donald Trump to victory. Along with closing the borders with Mexico, the president has cut the funds that government agencies were allocating to individuals, organizations, and entities in exchange for their action in support of globalism. To the voices of condemnation for these political decisions, decisions that are completely legitimate, is now added that of the Holy Father, who in his letter to the bishops of the United States of America has harshly expressed his condemnation of the, quote, mass deportation decided on by the U.S. government. Vigano. These accusations against the Trump government are false. There is no mass deportation occurring. Rather, there is a precisely focused decision to put an end to the floods of unregulated immigrants that previous administrations had planned, favored, and encouraged. In fact, deportation occurred in the opposite direction during the Clinton, Obama, and Biden administrations to increase the ethnic substitution plan. Those who are now tearing their garments do so only because their lucrative business has been put to an end. They have shamefully profited from this forced migration, which is made possible by the network of international organizations and organized crime that manage human trafficking. We need to understand what's behind this fraudulent operation. It is the desire to take the conflict between the immigrationist woke deep church and the Trump administration to the next level, dogmatizing the duty to welcome illegal immigrants and thus forcing American Catholics to see Trump as an enemy of the Catholic Church. In short, they are trying to turn President Trump into an adversary in order to undermine his support from Catholic voters. The real clash is between Trump's political conservatism, MAGA, with which the majority of Americans, including Catholics, identify, and the ultra-progressivism of the deep church. American Catholics, however, see through this fraud, while some, in obedience to their globalist masters, hurl anathemas against those who build walls. President Trump has announced, among other measures that we welcome with deep satisfaction, the return of the United States to the Geneva Consensus Declaration, which defends the right to life for all, reaffirms the importance of the family, and affirms that there is no international, quote, right, close quote, to abortion. Now, I will interject something. It comes from the Population Research Institute, Stephen Mosher. Anyway, it's very exciting that Trump has ended all U.S. government funding for abortion in South America and Africa. Hundreds of millions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer money was basically underwriting the availability of abortion in these poor countries. And Trump, with a stroke of his pen, just ended all that funding, shutting down USAID, was part of ending that funding. Just think about it. This evil, evil, evil Trump in 10 minutes saved millions of lives a year. Millions of lives a year. It's not that easy to make abortion illegal in the United States, but he certainly could stop paying for it all around the world, and forcing countries, by the way, to make abortion available as a condition for getting USAID. It's horrible, horrible, horrible. In a lot of ways, the United States is a wonderful, noble-hearted country, but in a lot of ways, the United States, because of the deep state, has produced an incalculable amount of evil and death and sin. USAID, the organization funded by the US government to channel money to all of these NGOs and quote charities, close quotes, and so forth, which Trump shut down, undoubtedly is the largest single promoter of homosexuality around the world, of abortion around the world, of transgenderism around the world, and maybe even of war. Unbelievable amount of evil done with American tax dollars against the will of the American people. It's mind-blowing. Anyway, go back to Vigano. The newly appointed Bishop of Detroit has proposed canonical sanctions, from a ban on receiving communion to excommunication for, drumroll please, border guards who do not allow illegal immigrants to violate the borders. In other words, border guards who do their job and don't break the law he has proposed excommunication or refusing communion to. This woke delirium, typical of the deep church, is even more serious in the face of the silence of the bishops on the scandal of a corrupt, self-styled Catholic president, in air quotes, like Joe Biden, who promoted abortion up to the moment of birth and yet was consistently, sacrilegiously admitted to communion. You have two kinds of wokists. You have ideological wokists who just think that, it's the greatest act of charity to provide abortions, okay? Or it's a great act of charity to mutilate children so they can pretend to be the opposite gender or whatever. So you can have people who are like ideologically woke, but the deep state is pretending to be wokist, you could say. They are promoting the same policies, not because they think it is virtuous or wonderful for people. They're promoting those policies because they want to enslave humanity for their own benefit. And so USAID has both of those wings in it. It has the genuine wokists, but more than that, if you ask me, much more than that, it's an agency for the deep state to fund all of these programs that are aimed at enslaving humanity and breaking down national sovereignty and enforcing a surveillance state around the world run by a small elite. The demographic decrease, which has been intentionally created by policies that discourage the birth rate and penalize the natural family, constitutes the main purpose of the action of the globalist elite, for which it proposes as a solution ethnic replacement with masses of foreigners. I'll continue because Vigano does a much better job than I can about this. No longer Catholic children in Catholic lands, but rather an intentional creation of mixed-race children who are without history, or mixed culture children, or mixed religion children, whatever you want to say, mixed children, who are without history, without tradition, without education or culture, without identity, without homeland, and without faith, exploited to feed the globalist Moloch and the tyranny of the World Economic Forum. This globalist dystopia aims at the erasure of national and ethnic identities, especially where they are founded on Christian civilization, and instead promotes anything linked to pagan and idolatrous and satanic beliefs. The cancellation of all differences and the external homologation of cultures ought to be considered by the Catholic Church as a disaster. However, the deep church is recklessly promoting it. You see, I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but when the hierarchy of the church promotes unbridled migration and unbridled immigration and the opening up of the borders to anyone who wants to come in to these countries characterized once upon a time by Christian values, like Europe and the United States, Judeo-Christian values if you prefer, the intention on the part of the deep state is to destroy the internal culture and value system and national identity and patriotism and loyalty and nationalism and all of that, and just have a mass of undifferentiated humanity with no cohesive, nothing producing cohesiveness. And so they just become like autonomous slaves to the surveillance state or to the deep state or whatever. Because all of these national characteristics, racial characteristics, religious characteristics provide a kind of unifying bond between the people. If you can break all of those unifying bonds so that everyone is just an autonomous cog in this, huge mechanism, or an autonomous atom in this huge cloud of humanity, then there's nothing resisting the dictatorship of the state, dictatorship of the deep state, whatever. The cancellation of all differences and the external, I'll say, homogenization of cultures ought to be considered by the Catholic Church as a disaster, whereas the deep church is recklessly promoting it. What has been emerging in the United States since President Trump's inauguration is only the tip of the iceberg of a vast subversive system that involves all Western states. These are not isolated cases of corruption, but a planned occupation that the globalist left considers indispensable in order to gain power, and once it has appropriated that power, use it for the establishment of a totalitarian regime. That's the point. And what is paradoxical and at the same time unprecedented is that the deep state even goes so far as to make its victims, that is all of us, pay the costs of this diabolical project, using taxpayers' money to confine us in our homes, deprive us of our freedom, and exterminate us with wars, famines, pandemics, and vaccines. In the same way, the deep church uses the offerings of the faithful to spread heresies, normalize vice and perversion, Islamize Christian nations, desecrate our churches and altars, and persecute dissenting voices with suspensions and excommunications. Through situations of permanent crisis that legitimize the authority to derogate from ordinary laws, the elite can achieve the goals they have set them for themselves. Okay, so you see, all of these societies have laws, and so the solution that the deep state has to address that is to create a continual series of crises that justify overriding the laws. We saw that during COVID, right? We see that in the Ukraine, where Zelensky has suspended elections, so forth and so on. You saw that with the vaccines being obligatory, being forced on people, which would be unthinkable legally, but because of how serious the emergency was, those protections were waived. You saw that actually with the Patriot Act with 9/11, where because of the crisis of terrorism in the United States, the right to privacy could be erased, And the federal government could set up a police force, which it was never allowed to do in the form of Department of Homeland Security. So the deep state requires this continual, unending series of crises in order to break down laws that protect individuals against the state. Continuing. If we want to create an emergency as a pretext to legitimize the ceding of sovereignty to private lobbies, it is necessary that those who operate the institutional and media machine have a direct interest in promoting the crisis, even if they know perfectly well that it is a fraud. Governments, politicians, journalists, judges, doctors, teachers, law enforcement, actors and singers, intellectuals and influencers, all of them depend for their support on their active collaboration with the deep state. They are paid as mercenaries, and as mercenaries they have no other master than money, success, and power, and also those who allow them to have that money, that power. At the top of the infernal globalist pyramid that makes use of these mercenaries, we find the Luciferian delirium of those who want to do evil against God and against man, seeking to replace God with Satan and man with the androgynous humanoid. I have on my, political blog, I had some compilations of clips from news shows in the United States where on a given day you would have, I'm not exaggerating, you would have 40 or 50 newscasters on different networks, on different news shows using the exact same phrase, like, President Biden is sharp as a tack, sharp as a tack, sharp as a tack, sharp as a tack. And you'd have that repeated 50 times by all of these different talking heads. And it was absolutely clear, because they were all using exactly the same phrase, that there was actually an email going out every morning at 2 a.m. to all of these media organizations telling them what the catchphrase for that day is supposed to be, as a kind of massive propaganda. This global network of corruption has served, and in part still serves, especially in Europe, to alter social dynamics in a criminal and fraudulent way. Such undue and unprecedented interference cannot simply be identified and acknowledged, it must also be eradicated and punished. And when I say that, I am referring mainly to those responsible, to those who have been guilty of a betrayal that is at the origin of the moral, social, and economic decay that is being forcibly imposed on us. It is no longer possible to tolerate that Soros, Gates, Schwab, Obama, the Clintons, the Bidens, and so forth, and other conspirators continue to rage against the whole of humanity over people who are largely unaware that they are the object of a diabolical experiment of social engineering aimed at their physical and moral extermination. If President Trump aims to cut off the head of the Leviathan, as he is already doing, we can only be happy and finally breathe a sigh of relief. The Trump administration is well aware of two things. First, there is a subversive supranational power that constitutes a concrete threat to the sovereignty of nations and to all humanity. Secondly, there's a group of people and agencies that support this power because they derive an advantage from it in terms of power and money. Cutting off funds to the accomplices of the globalist criminal system and its deep power means depriving the elite of the instrument of control and propaganda. Not even Judas would have betrayed Christ without receiving the 30 pieces of silver from the Sanhedrin. Without the price of blood, the incentive to commit crime is also lost, and with it the blackmail of those who are said to have committed it. An excellent move, therefore, which is already having significant repercussions at the global level, has been the interruption of USAID's funding, accompanied by the grotesque jeremiads of those who have been dutifully deprived of it. I'm going to end there. Oh, thanks for watching.
Gloria a Laos. et honor tibi sit, Rex Christi